Today I'm going to read Chapter 12, The War I Finally Won. The next morning I woke early, nervous and excited. I dressed and made the fire and started oatmeal and tea. Jamie woke up cranky. He said his head hurt, so did his arm. You must have overdone it, Susan told him. Too much Christmas. Pop back into bed. I'll read to you after I come home from walking Ada to the stables. I said, I can stay home. I'll take care of him. A paper chase was like a fox hunt without a fox or hounds. Did I want to go on a fox hunt, really? Don't be silly, Susan said. Jamie just needs sleep. I looked at her. Fill the coal hod while I fry you an egg. You'll need it for staying power. You'll probably be in the saddle for hours, she smiled. Becky was a great believer in eggs before a hunt. Eggs weren't rationed yet, but they were scarce. Jamie wanted hens. I brought in more coal. I straightened the sitting room. I ate my egg with toasted war bread, drank my tea, and started to do the breakfast dishes. Susan came into the kitchen, pulling on her coat. Leave that. It's time to go. I'll walk over with you. You don't need to, I said, as if I couldn't walk to the Thornton stables without help. Well, I'd like to, said Susan. I'll probably know everyone there. These were Becky's friends. Shouldn't you stay with Jamie? Ada. Susan raised her eyebrows. He's asleep. Also, he's perfectly capable of being left alone for a short time. He might break his other arm. He might. I don't need you, I said. I know that, Susan said. Neither does Jamie just now. Let's go. The Thornton stables were crowded with unfamiliar adults wearing posh riding habits and gleaming horses with braided manes. Maggie had lent me a tweed coat, and I had jodhpurs and proper boots, Maggie's hand-me-down, so I knew I looked all right. I looked just like Maggie, but I felt wildly out of place. I hadn't braided Butter's mane. I didn't know how. Susan surveyed the people with a slight smile. Same old crowd. She spoke to a few of them and then followed me into Butter's stall and stood by Butter's head while I brushed him. You never rode, I said. She had Becky's hunters after Becky died. I gave it a good try, Susan said. Becky wanted me to. It just wasn't quite my thing. Too frightening being on top of a 1,000-pound animal with a tiny little mind of its own. I looked up. Susan? Afraid? But I went to the parties, she continued, the hunt breakfasts and the teas, and once even the hunt ball. She buckled Butter's girth on his offside and passed it under his belly to me. Did you like the parties? I did, Susan said. This surprised me. Susan had been so sad about Becky's death that she didn't enjoy anything. She never. Susan said, I have fond memories. What's fond? I wrestled the bit into Butter's mouth. Happy, content. You're going home now, right? I slid the reins over Butter's head and led him out of the stall. I looked around for Maggie. Butter! A woman I didn't know clapped her hands in delight. Look, everyone, Butter's back. And Miss Smith. She extended her hand to Susan, who shook it firmly. Are you riding again? The woman asked. No, said Susan. She patted my shoulder. This is my ward, Ada. She's taken over Butter. The woman shook my hand too. How lucky for you, she said. Becky Montgomery trained that pony well. Susan and the woman kept talking. I saw Maggie across the yard with her pony, Ivy. I tightened my girth and climbed onto the saddle. Someone blew a horn. There was a lot of laughing at that, though I didn't know why. Susan smiled and waved at me through the crowd. I nodded to her and gathered up my reins. You, Maggie said. You look scared. I didn't think you were ever scared. Ma'am was worse. I was afraid. I had learned never to admit it. There's so many people, I said instead. Before the war, it was always like this, Maggie said. In season, the hounds went out thrice a week. There weren't any hounds now. Instead, we chased a trail of scraps of paper strewn by Fred from horseback a couple of hours beforehand. Lord Thornton led the way. Maggie and I held our ponies until the field cleared. As juniors, we had to ride in the rear. The galloping horses made Butter wild. He wanted to race. I held him tighter while he fought me, snatching at the bit. Sweat streaked his sides. I braced my hands against his neck. Stop it, I said to him. You idiot, behave. Butter tossed his head. He danced sideways. He jigged. Let him go, Maggie said. Let him run a little. He'll settle down. I let him run, but I still had to grip the reins so hard my fingers hurt. I had never known Butter to misbehave. You're winding him up, Maggie said. Relax. I couldn't relax. I didn't dare. A rabbit darted out from under Butter's hooves, startling me more than it startled Butter. My hands hurt. My breath hurt in my chest. The wind forced tears from my eyes. We came to a big ditch full of water. Ivy plonked into it and waded through. Butter hesitated and then leaped. I flew with him up out of the stable, miles from the saddle. He landed on the ditch's far side. I kept going. I dropped the reins, pulled my arms in, and took the fall on my shoulder like Lady Thornton had said. I rolled across the grass unhurt. Butter pranced in place, his feet tangled in the dangling reins. He'd break the reins next, the wretched pony. I scrambled to my feet. Jonathan Thornton stopped Oban at Butter's side. Easy, he said to Butter. To me, he said, are you all right? I nodded. I could feel my face flame. It had been months since I'd last fallen off, since before the hospital. Jonathan dismounted. He untangled Butter and offered me a leg up. I can do it myself, I said. Well, of course you can, he agreed. I'm just trying to act the gentleman. I didn't mean to be prickly at him. I'm sorry. I let him toss me back into Butter's saddle. Don't be, he said. We don't call it Champagne Ditch for nothing. I didn't know what that meant. That ditch is famous for getting people off. And if you fall off during a hunt, you have to buy a bottle of champagne for the masters. He grinned. Don't worry. I don't think the paper chase counts. Besides, you're a little young for champagne. I frowned at him. I didn't know the word champagne. Fizzy wine, Maggie said helpfully. French stuff. I've had a sip. It's lovely. Jonathan raised his eyebrows. A sip, Maggie said. The other riders had left us far behind. We started after them at an easy canter. Butter quit fighting. Either he was finally tired or he was sorry that he had dumped me. Probably tired. Where'd you learn to ride? Jonathan asked. Here, I said. Fred teaches me. Then I laughed, remembering. I actually started with your horse, Oban. He jumped into our field. I jumped him out again. Jonathan stared. That was you? That was me, I said. It had been the day I first met Maggie, the day she whacked her head. But Mom said that was an evacuee, Jonathan said. A lame girl from the slums. She made it sound like an accident. You weren't killed. It probably was an accident. I didn't know anything, I added. I'm not lame. Oh, I can see that, Jonathan said. I was never lame, I said. Maggie frowned at me but didn't say anything. Neither did Jonathan. Your horse is lovely, he said, to fill the odd silence. Jonathan grinned. My sister despises him. I know, I said, but I love him. He didn't dump me when he could have, and he's beautiful. Oban had a grace and elegance Butter could never touch. It was like the difference between the Honorable Margaret Thornton and me. We cantered on, jumping a stile and then another smaller ditch. Butter had settled, and I felt safer riding between Jonathan and Maggie. I have to go back to the airfield tomorrow, Jonathan said. But next time I'm on leave, we'll ride out together, the two of you and me, just us three. Do you mean that? I asked. His brown eyes looked directly into mine. Word of honor, he said. The rest of the riders had paused at the far end of the field. Jonathan trotted toward some of his friends. I said to Maggie, you never told me he was so nice. She shook her head at me. I never knew he was. Then she said, why'd you say you were never lame? He knows all about your clubfoot and your surgery. I shrugged. I didn't know why. I'm not lame, I said. Well, it wasn't entirely true. I knew I still limped some, even now, but all those words, lame, crippled, no, but a disgrace, I wanted to forget I'd ever been that girl. After the chase, the Thorntons hosted what they called a breakfast, even though we didn't start eating until mid-afternoon. Any meal you have after hunting is called breakfast, Maggie said. It doesn't make a sense to me either. Maggie said if there wasn't a war on, we would be eating steak and kidney pie, but instead we had a variation on Lord Woolton pie, a particularly awful wartime dish of baked vegetables thickened with oatmeal. It was nearly full dark by the time I got home. Susan had put the blackout up by herself, and she and Jamie were snug by the fire. She smiled when I came in. Did you enjoy it? I took off my filthy boots in the entry. I nodded to Susan, smiling back. She got up and came toward me. I've come up with the perfect gift for you, she said. She handed me a slip of paper. Here. Happy Christmas. I padded into the room and pushed Jamie over so I could sit on the sofa. I unfolded Susan's paper. In large, clearly printed letters, it read, Transfer of ownership. The pony named Butter from Susan Elizabeth Smith to Ada Marie Smith, December 26th, 1940. And that's the end of chapter 12.